about,
we were talking
are there any genuinely Christian arguments
Oh yeah.
for a tolerance of homosexuality? Not
Okay,
even
define tolerance, because
a
everybody
tolerance
defines it.
as here, and here's the only argument I've ever heard that actually seems to hold some water, even though I disagree with it, which is it's homosexuality not ideal. It's not the way God intended the world to work. But this is a fallen world, and sometimes God intended us all to have 2 arms and 2 legs, but sometimes you're born with 1 arm. So maybe you're born kind of sexually a cripple, so to speak, and you have this.
I'm gonna let you finish.
And I agree with what you're about to say. Yeah. I think, but if you're born with this issue, God still wants you to live kind of the most honoring life you can, and so a monogamous commitment is still better than nothing. And so if you can only do that with a man, then it's lesser, it's not as good, but it's at least something that God can look at and say, well, it's not ideal, but I understand why you're doing that, and I have grace for that. That's the only argument I've heard that seems to hold some water. I still disagree with it. One, because I don't think you're born gay. I think it's kind of like alcoholism in the sense that you can be born with a certain disposition, but you still have to make choices, or other people, in the case of homosexuality, other people make choices. I think a lot of it has to do with your relationship with your parents, and perhaps some trauma that happened in your life. A huge percentage of gay people have experienced some pretty significant trauma, or are autistic.
Which is very interesting.
So my point is, I think it's basically the most genetic component could be you may have a disposition, but the disposition still has to be activated by nurture rather than nature, so to speak. And so because of that, I don't really buy the argument, but I can see how a believing Christian could be convinced of that argument while not being a heretic.
Okay, so.
But at the same time, is it intrinsically heresy? Maybe you're right. But it's at least logical, I think.
If I was hypothetically talking to someone who was a Christian, and I've got a bunch of friends who are like this too. So if I'm talking to someone who is a Christian and also believes it's okay, gay marriage, gay relationships, whatever are okay on whatever capacity, I'm just going to lump that all together for easy talking about it. There are a few things at play that I've seen. So first of all, 99.9% of the time, they say that gay marriage or gay relationships or whatever are okay because they have someone they love who is in one, and they don't want to say bad things about that person.
I would say not 99.9%, but maybe 85%.
Okay.
It's a vast majority. I agree with you.
Of the people.
Well, or
believe that.
Or they are gay themselves.
Yeah.
One or the other.
Usually they are trying to justify something that someone they care about is doing, whether that's themselves or someone else.
Yes.
And
not always, but a lot of the time.
Yeah. And in those cases, I don't bother having the conversation because they don't want to talk about it. They just want to not feel bad about their scenario. And I'm like, okay, if there's a real conversation to be had, we'll have it. Otherwise, you do you, I guess.
Yeah. The other 15%, though, are the people I'm talking about.
Yes. And for the people who actually think that, I have a few things. And the first one is, if gay marriage is not a big deal, if gay relationships are not a big deal, then why, historically, why were the ancient Jews punished for being gay in the same way as if they murdered someone?
Well,
or if they slept with a dog. Same punishment for all three.
It's a good point. I think that these people would point to the fact that the Old Testament law is different than the New Testament law.
It is.
Under the new covenant, there's a lot more grace.
We're not talking about grace.
Yeah, well, I agree with you.
And that's actually derailing it, because I'm not talking about what God has
I'm just saying that's what I think they would say.
I know.
Because you're right, because at the end of the day,
it's not about grace. It's about
why did God punish that way? I mean, it's not like it was like, okay, you're going to be fined. It's like, no, you're going to be put to death.
It's like, no, we're going to hit you with rocks until you die.
Yeah. Now,
that's
granted,
how big of a deal it was. And I'm not saying that Christians are just like the Jews or have the same thing. Like, it's a different thing.
We're also not saying that you should stone gay people or push them off rooftops as they do in other parts of the world.
Yeah.
But
no, I do not.
There is a reason why it had such a strong prohibition.
Yes. And the reason is it is wrong. Period. End of sentence.
Agreed. Also,
does that mean you're going to hell just because you're gay? No.
No. And we don't believe that at all.
God can save you from anything. Now, I do think there's a lot of nuance in that, and also there's a lot
of nuance in
there are a lot of keywords I put in there that are worth a whole discussion in themselves. But staying on this topic, that's my first thing, is if it wasn't a big deal, it would have had a not big deal punishment back in the day.
It's a very good point.
I think it's a much better argument, instead of saying that the new covenant has more grace. It's like, yeah, okay, cool, whatever. That doesn't tell me anything about how I should behave, which is what I care about right now. I'm assuming I'm talking to a Christian in good faith who wants to be a Christian.
And that Christian is going to say, I am incapable of behaving in the way that is the norm expected by the Bible, and so this is my consolation prize, so to speak.
And to that, I would say one of the fruits of the Spirit is self-control.
I agree. You're right. And so in that case,
there is no argument for gay relationships in the Bible.
You're right. There's none in the Bible.
None.
You can try to read it as best you can. Now, I heard another gay guy. Name is Rick Grinnell. He's in the Trump administration. He's gay and he's a Christian, and he basically said, yeah, we all need God's grace every day, and I make plenty of mistakes, but I'm trying my best to. And so in that case,
as long as you're walking toward God, I think you're good.
Yes, and I think he is walking towards God, and I think he might. I think he's kind of taken the Saint Augustine approach, where he says, "Lord, make me chaste, but not yet." That probably kind of what he's the mentality. And look, Saint Augustine was a great guy. All right, I didn't think
I liked
positive.
Him, and then I read some of his stuff, and I was like, "Oh, that's why people like him."
I'm pretty positive we're gonna see him in heaven. You know, you don't know for sure but pretty positive. So, you know, if it's good enough for Saint Augustine, I think it's probably good enough for some of us here. So that's why I say there's nuances to it, but at the same time, it is objectively morally wrong to engage in sexual activity with someone of the same sex.
Yes.
Not objectively moral wrong to just be tempted. That's just living in real life.
Yeah.
You're tempted to do things that are wrong.
Nowhere in the Bible does it say you're not supposed to be tempted.
Jesus was tempted.
Yeah. Being tempted doesn't actually mean anything. Your actions are what decide it. And this is something that I actually am very passionate about, that a lot of Christians, I think, overlook. And that is, so you kind of got two groups of people. There's obviously people in the beginning, in the middle. But you've got people who are like, you are saved by being a good person. And then there are people who are like, you are saved just because Jesus and absolutely nothing else. I think it's a middle ground, because I agree with James from the Bible in that you are saved because Jesus saved you. But there is still, if you don't live like you're saved, then are you really saved? For example, let's just give...
I mean, that's pretty much what James says. Yeah.
Let's say, for example, what's an organization of people who are known for a specific thing?
That Christians are known to believe in God?
Non-religious. Non-religious.
Republicans? I don't know. What kind of organization is that about?
Let's say, we'll start with the Republicans. I'm going to go through a few examples.
Okay.
So, let's say somebody's like, yeah, I'm a Republican. And then you look at their record of what they've done. And they voted for Obama and Biden. And they voted for Clinton. And they voted...
So you mean Adam Kinzinger? Yeah,
and they voted, like, pro-abortion, every single...
And Liz Cheney, yeah, okay. I think we know these people.
Yes, they exist.
Yeah.
Are those people actually Republican?
You're right.
No, they're not. But how do you know that? They say they're Republican.
Because of their actions.
Exactly.
I
think the same thing applies to Christianity.
I think you're absolutely
It's not enough to say you are one.
Yeah, it isn't. Because if you don't live like one, then you're just a rhino. You're the Christian version of a rhino. You're a Christian in name only.
Yeah.
That sounds bad. I'm not even going to say that. It sounds like a cuss word. You get the acronym.
Yeah. And I think there's an interesting thing. There is a bit of nuance that I think is important to mention, which I think personally, the more that you claim Christianity as what you are, the more God will still work on you. And I think there is power in claiming Christianity and claiming Jesus as your Lord. Whether or not you do anything about it, there's still power in it.
I agree. I
think that's why the Catholic Church is still around.
Yeah.
Because they claim Jesus really hard, even though they don't live it out haven't throughout history in a lot of places. They haven't as well.
That's why they baptize infants. Is to start that they're basically saying, okay, well, we're going to start you off. Mm-hmm. You're in here.
Yeah.
You didn't make a choice. You know, Protestants tend to believe you have to make a choice to follow Jesus, but they're saying, no, we're going to start you off in here. We're going to start you off with God's claim on you. That way, you have to work really hard to get out of that, and maybe you can, but you have to work for it.
Yeah.
I have my problems. Oh, I've got a hair dangling. Got my problems with a lot of the Catholic, ideology there. But I at least understand the premise.
I have met more non-Christians who are former Catholics than non-Christians who are former anything else, except for Baptists.
It's funny. I actually know several Christians who converted to the Catholic Church because they were dissatisfied with the way the rest of the church was.
Which I honestly,
I see a lot of both of that.
Because when we were growing up, we were growing up in a...
We grew up in a vineyard church.
Yeah, in a vineyard.
I still am in a vineyard church.
Yeah, and I have a fondness for vineyard as well, but I never liked the lack of roots that I felt with it.
And I understand that. That's an issue I have with the vineyard church.
But
I
then you
understand
go to something like Catholics, and all there is roots, and there's no plant.
Yeah, at least in a lot of Catholic
It depends. That's the thing. There's a wide variety. I'm
just like there's a
generalizing.
wide variety of vineyard churches, and the Catholic Church likes to make this claim that they're all kind of the same, but they're really not.
Yeah, no.
Your priest in Nashville is going to be different than your priest in Los Angeles. That's just the reality.
Oh yeah.
So
big time.
The
same goes with any group of people.
Same goes with any group.
We talk in generalizations because that's the only way to talk about it.
It's the only way to talk about it, but
then you can dive into nuances.
You have to
relevant.
and you have to understand when you're listening to commentators
in general,
that there's always exceptions to basically every pronouncement that we make. And so if I say something and you say, well, that's not true for me, I did X, Y, and Z, I'm like, okay, great.
It's like,
that doesn't prove
I wasn't talking about you.
Yeah, I wasn't exactly.
It's like you're the one who applied that label to
yourself.
Exactly.
You're the exception. Good for you. Like if I say it is good for people to get married and have kids, and you're like, I am single and I am happy and I have devoted my life to just being in the ministry and blah. I'm like, great, good for you.
Don't get me started on being in the ministry.
Okay, that is a vague term.
I know what you're
right.
going for.
You know what I'm going for.
Yes,
There's a lot of people who...
I am not disagreeing with anything you just said.
but you're right.
That is an abused
for me.
Term. Triggered. I'm triggered.
It is an abused term because I remember talking to this one guy who was like a surfer dude, and he's single, and he's talking about how much he never wants to get married. I'm just a free-floating surfer. I can do whatever I want when I want. And I'm like, I've known a lot of people who, like, by the time they're 50, they kind of regret those decisions. I'm not sure if that's really He's like, nah, man, I'm living for Jesus. I'm like, you just told me you're surfing. Yeah, I'm surfing for Jesus, man. I'm like, I mean, maybe sometimes, but it seems like you kind of prioritize the surfing, like there's a hierarchy of priorities that's not really so I have no problem with people who are like, no, I'm going to be single and I'm going to devote my life to God, and I'm going to work 40 hours, 50 hours, 60 hours a week trying to improve other people's lives. Great, good for you. I'm happy for you. You have no kids.
Paul
you're
did
still
something like that.
Exactly. You may not have kids, but you're working with God. God's going to give you stuff to fulfill you. Wonderful. No problem with that. Then I'm not talking about you when I say it's good to get married and have kids. Then I'm just not, and that's okay.
Well,
I
think getting married is a good thing, and I think in a straight relationship, being faithful to your wife or husband
is the next step. Yes,
it's also important.
Have to.
And having kids is also good.
Yes.
And raising the kids with love.
Yes.
And also raising the kids well, which is obviously that's a very nuanced and complicated topic, but raising kids well is also good.
Yes.
Like those are
all these things are good. It
no
doesn't mean literally every single person has to do them.
Yes. Just like not every single person has to go help when there's a tsunami in Japan.
Exactly. But it's good for that to be kind of a norm that society is based around.
Yeah.
Even if not everybody does it. Yeah. That's why you don't have kids, but you're generally pro-family. You're like, I like the family.
Families are good.
Yes.
I think kids who have two parents of opposite genders who actually love each other and actually care about the kids and stay with each other forever because they're married is a good thing.
And that's called privilege. If you grew up in that family, you are privileged, and that's a good thing, and you should not apologize for it. You should be grateful for it.
Did you
Two-parent privilege is a real thing.
Okay.
Being raised in a family
privilege means something different to some people than to others. Are you talking privilege in terms of like an unfair boost?
No, I'm talking about privilege
in terms of something you should be grateful for. It's a privilege and an honor to be able to.
I don't think the way the liberals use the term privilege is actually the proper meaning of the word privilege.
Yeah, they usurp language all the time.
Yes. So when I say privilege, I mean you have been given something that you did not earn.
Yeah.
But it benefits you.
Yeah.
And the proper response is thank you for giving me that thing.
Yes.
I will use it to the best of my ability and glorify God with it. That's the proper response.
And interestingly, that's the same response you should have when, as a Christian, toward Jesus' death on the cross.
Yes, because talk about privileges you did not earn. You certainly did not earn that salvation.
Yeah. And
But we say thank you. We take that as a gift.
And if you do nothing with it, that's the equivalent of taking the gift and just tossing it behind you.
Exactly. It's actually really insulting.
Yeah, you're burying your talents, and then you're a wicked servant.
Yes, that's very true.
So I think that is probably worse than just never converting in the first place. Personally, if you look at the parable of the talents.
I don't know which is worse, simply because I think when you get down that road, you're kind of like, who's worse, Stalin or Mao?
Yeah, that's
it's
fair.
kind of that kind of
like
question.
it's just like there's a level
in
of
both
that where it's
circumstances
like,
you're going to hell. So it's like, okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right.
Well, there's an interesting thing too. I don't want to derail it, but I think I believe something different than you about hell, and it's
we did have a conversation
about that?
Yeah, we did have a conversation about that. We ended up agreeing.
Okay.
You just use different language to say similar things because, as is your norm, you don't like the way most people talk about a thing.
I find most people talk about things using a lot of kind of jargon, where it's like they've pre-agreed.
You're not wrong about that.
They've redefined. Their culture has redefined what certain words mean in order to convey certain ideas that I find inaccurate, and so I use words that I feel are more accurate to what I believe.
And you're talking to a lawyer, and so obviously, I am the first one to say precision in language is absolutely vital. In fact, that's one of Jordan Peterson's 12 rules for life. Be precise and articulate in the way that you speak.
There's a reason he talks very slowly and intentionally.
Yes, he does. I think it's vastly important.
Yeah.
So, this was a really long cold open.
Yes, it was.
But it was a good one.
It was a good one.
It was a good one. So, welcome back to the show.
Welcome back to Grandma.